Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Museum of Science. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'd like to take a moment just to thank Jack and Susie Reno. Jack and Susie created the Reno Family Foundation Symposium Series, and it's through their generosity that we are able to sort of examine cultural trends in technology and science and bring important players like tonight's guests to the museum. Last year, North Korean hackers digitally froze Britain's public health system, Russia's interior ministry, telecommunications companies across Europe, and FedEx in the United States. A month later, Russian state hackers similarly paralyzed the Ukraine on the eve of that country's Independence Day. And over the last year, American cities, Dallas and Atlanta, have suffered cyber attacks from a hacker group somewhere in the world. Our special guests tonight have a varied expertise in technology, cybersecurity, cyber attacks, future warfare, and internet culture, and they will take us deep into the cyber world in which all of us now live. Emily Dreyfus will be our guide, so without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Emily Dreyfus.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. So, for as long as there has been war, the tactics and rules and means of that conflict have been changing. We've come from ancient battles fought with spears to medieval catapults, from rows of soldiers firing guns in a line to warplanes dropping bombs on tanks, all the way to the 21st century, now, when a battle can be waged at the push of a button. In 2010, the US crippled Iran's nuclear capabilities using a piece of malware written on a computer and delivered via a thumb drive. Modern warfare is fought not only on battlefields and not only by humans and our weapons, but by our robots, our drones, our lines of code, and even our memes. Tonight, we're going to discuss how the internet and the creation of cyberspace has changed the way wars are fought, has acted like a jet fuel accelerant for the transmission and power of propaganda, and how it has opened up whole new ways for us to be vulnerable. It's a timely conversation. Just last month, the city of Atlanta was taken hostage by ransomware. All of its computer systems were shut down. Its DMV, the court system, all the government computers were inaccessible. Just last week, the Pentagon announced that it's finally going to invest a lot more time, energy, and money into protecting our satellites. That's how worried our military is that space war is soon going to be a reality. And just today, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg sat for his second day of congressional hearings to defend the role that his social media company played in misinformation that may have swayed the US election. And then later this afternoon, the President of the United States of America went on Twitter and, using 140 characters, announced to Russia that he was going to send bombs to Syria. And he mentioned smart bombs, which is something we will get into tonight. Under the new warfare paradigm, your data can and will be used against you. Tonight we have three experts who are going to talk about all of these things. Peter Singer, he is a political scientist and an author of many books, including Cybersecurity and Cyberwar, What Everyone Needs to Know. We have Amanda Hess, a writer from the New York Times. She writes about internet culture, and we're going to hear her incredible work on the weaponization of memes. And we have with us Bruce Schneier, who is many things. Among them, he's a cryptographer, he's a professor at Harvard, and he's a general expert in all things cybersecurity. So let's get this conversation started. I would like to welcome Peter Singer.
So thank you for the invitation and the kind welcome. I was asked to set the scene for where we are in this place, and I thought would be interesting is to go back a decade and pull back and think about what would we be talking about relative to cybersecurity and cyber war 10 years ago. And it would have been issues like the growing concern over transnational criminal networks beginning to kind of clog the e-commerce marketplace. We would have talked about state-linked threats, but it would have been the concern of intellectual property theft, stealing secrets, and the worry that it might start to complicate U.S.-China relations. And we also might have had a conversation about privacy and surveillance, but in those pre-Snowden days, it would have been something around like, oh, China recently hacked Google or the like. Now, as we're gathered here today, the challenge is that all of those issues, cybercrime, surveillance questions like, they're still with us. They didn't go away. But we're also now adding a series of new challenges to them, kind of fundamental changes in the cybersecurity threat landscape. And if we're going to have any effective cybersecurity, whether it's as a globe, whether it's as a nation, whether it is as an organization, be it a military or a business, or as individuals, we're going to have to get a hand on these key trends that are out there changing. Now, the first one of these is the challenge of the complete and utter collapse of cyber deterrence in the wake of the most important, most successful cyber attack in history. That is, when you're talking about the Russian campaign to target the United States and our allies in a series of cyber operations hitting everything from political organizations to banks to universities, think tanks, nuclear research facilities, this is the big one. And in response to it, we've effectively, I don't know what the term is for, lightly tapping a wrist that's already been slapped. And in essence, what has happened is that while we spent the last decade trying to create a set of norms that would change the incentives in cybersecurity, the message that not just a Russia, but every other attacker has received from this, both the success of the operations and the lack of response to them, is that these attacks are high gain and low to no cost. And that change in the deterrence framework will shape everyone's perceptions moving forward. And it's not just the operations that I mentioned that target us, but as was also in the introduction, it's the turning of Ukraine into what is in effect a battle lab for cyber war, where Russia tested out all sorts of different types of operations targeting power grids and the like. In many ways, you might think of the Ukraine war as equivalent to the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, where both the German military tested out all sorts of military tactics that they would later use in World War II. The Blitzkrieg, does it work or not? But also the Germans got the message, hey, we can get away with this. Now, the next challenge is a little bit of the technology that we have here. We're moving a little bit faster. Is for all the kind of political ills that are just laid out there, the more traditional threats in cybersecurity haven't gone away. Indeed, last year we saw a doubling in the number of cyber incidents. But the problem is that we've also seen attacks of a new kind of scale. The term mega breach applies to attacks that touch 10 million identities. They used to be incredibly rare. So for example, in 2012, there was only one mega breach the entire year. Now we're getting them every couple of weeks. You think whether it's Uber or Equifax or whatnot, and they're touching hundreds of millions of people. And so when you sum them together, it fundamentally changes how we think about our information, its security, but also how governments and businesses are able to trust and rely that information as it's out there on scale. So we're seeing mega breach after mega breach, and it may even change the way that we use information online to define who we are and what we're allowed to do, may turn it to be unsustainable. Next challenge. The threat actors that originally, troubled us in cybersecurity were, at first it was the proverbial, teenager in the basement, an individual hacker in search of attention. Then it was criminal groups. What we're seeing now is a hybridization of threat. And by this, what I'm talking about is we are seeing government threat actors melding with individual and criminal threat actors. So in some situations, it's governments using cyber criminals to conduct political type operations. Much of the Russian activities targeting us in our election have that kind of parallel, where you're seeing individuals engaged in regular cybercrime swinging into a political type operation. And it's not just the individuals, they're using some of the same tactics and technologies. There's the opposite of it, which is, it seems like it's the opposite, but it's also in many ways sort of the flip side of the coin, where it's hybridization, where it is a government actor engaging in cyber crime. So a good example of this is Lazarus Group, which is linked to North Korea. It's a North Korean government group, but it conducted one of the biggest bank robberies in human history. It hacked the systems of a series of banks and stole at least $94 million. They were actually after $1 billion. So it was a little bit of a failure for them to only get 1/10 of that. Now, this hybridization allows kind of the best of both worlds, because the actor can swing back and forth. They can get away with cyber crime by using state assets, or it's a state operation and they can say, no, it has nothing to do with the state. It also makes it very difficult to go after them with the traditional means. So you can't, for example, report to Russia, hey, your criminals attacked the US election. That was kind of the point, right? There's another kind of hybridization that we're going to hear a little bit more about, is where it's bringing together cyber operations, hacking the network, with what we call information warfare or influence campaigns, which are about hacking the people behind the network. This is something that I'm wrestling with in an upcoming book. It's very advertising. In October, it'll come out, called Like War, and it's about the melding of these places. And we've become very familiar with this in terms of our own election, where you saw everything from hacking, stealing secrets from the DNC or John Podesta, but combined with sock puppets, humans posing as someone else online, bots driving online trends. A good illustration of this is Guccifer 2.0, which was a fake account of the real hackers that stole some of the key secrets that played out in the election. And in turn, Tennessee GOP, which posed as if it was the unofficial account of Tennessee Republicans, but was actually a series of Russian actors in the Internet Research Agency. Now, when people say, oh, well, these weren't all that important, just this one account, Tennessee GOP, was the 7th most read Twitter account on all of Twitter on election day. Just that one single account. Then we have a new kind of attack that was mentioned in terms of ransomware. Now, what you have here is not the attacks we've grown used to of someone breaking in and trying to steal something from you, steal your secrets, steal your credit card information. Instead, it's breaking in and trying to keep you from making use of it, holding the files hostage so that you can't conduct your operations, whether it's a city government or a private business or whatnot. This is one of the fastest growing areas of cyber threat. Indeed, last year, ransomware saw 167 times growth. Not 167%, 167 times. And part of the reason is that it pays, and it pays more and more. So the average take per victim in 2015 in a ransomware attack was $294. Last year, the average take was $1,077. So you can see why cyber criminals would go into this, because it's paying more and more. It's also costing more and more. So one of the attacks that was mentioned in the introduction was NotPetya. NotPetya caused losses at FedEx alone of $300 million. Just that one company lost that amount. Go back to the story of hybridization. It was a criminal attack and the like, but it also was, and it caused harm to private industry, but NotPetya has been linked back to Russian hackers working with their government. Now, the challenge is, that sounded really tough, really bad. We're going to see it grow, because so far we've been holding files hostage. We're going to see things begin to be held hostage. At various hacker conventions, we've seen demonstrations of holding everything from thermostats to the operation of cars to water treatment plants hostage, where you can keep them from operating. And this leads to the final change that's out there that I think we're also going to hear a little bit more about, which is how the internet itself is changing, which is changing the types of attacks and threats. The internet is evolving into an internet of things. So originally we were using computers and smartphones for us to communicate back and forth. Now increasingly we're weaving together objects that are having conversations. They're running their operations in essence kind of without us. Again, whether it's a thermostat and a power grid to a smart car, you name it. And what this is doing is it massively grows the attack surface, the targets that you can go after. But unfortunately, we're also repeating all the old mistakes of cybersecurity in terms of we're not baking in security when we loop them in. The responsibility for securing these things is unclear right now. The liability of who pays when it goes wrong is unclear right now. All the things that played out with kind of the regular internet is playing out with the Internet of Things, and so we're seeing massive vulnerabilities. One study found that 70% of the things woven into the Internet of Things have known vulnerabilities in them. And of course, as you know, you're familiar in cybersecurity, it's not just the known stuff that gets you. So when we're looking at the attacks on it, we've already seen examples of things starting to be held hostage. I think this is the final vector of change that we're going to see, which are attacks that go after the things and cause kinetic change in the world, physical change in the world. We got a taste of it, as Emily mentioned, with Stuxnet, which was a cyber weapon that changed the operation of an Iranian nuclear research facility. But we're also going to see it with the operation of everything from power grids to cars to thermostats, you name it. I think that's going to be a huge change for cybersecurity because the stakes grow, because you're going to be able to break things and you're going to be able to kill people. So we are going to see cyber attacks that cause physical harm become more common, and that will fundamentally change the politics of cybersecurity because finally the rest of us are going to be able to wrap our heads around the costs and consequences of it. Congress, voters, consumers, presidents, we're all going to change how we think about cybersecurity when suddenly things start to break and people start to lose lives. So with all that happy scene setting, we can move into the next part of the conversation. I, again, appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Everybody freaked out enough yet? I'm sure it's going to be fine. So I'm Amanda Hess. I write about internet culture for the New York Times, and that basically means that I write about people and what we do online. So now that we've talked about North Korean hackers and Russian cyber criminals, I'm going to talk a little bit about us. Because as we all go about our business on the internet, we're often unwittingly surrendering our data that can be used against us. We're accelerating disinformation, sometimes from shadowy foreign governments, and we're being used as pawns in these information wars. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two fronts of those wars that we're involved in, sometimes without even knowing it. So the first front is our personality, or our personal brands, to use sort of the parlance of our times. So I'm a journalist, which means that I have a somewhat public-facing profile, and that kind of comes with the territory. But these days, we are all being encouraged to cultivate a personal brand in order to ensure our livelihoods. And that phrase, personal brand, it seems new. It was actually coined in 1997 by a business writer named Tom Peters. And to give you a sense of where things were at the time, he wrote a story for a magazine about how we should all start personally branding ourselves in the same way that Coca-Cola is a brand. At the time, Tommy Hilfiger was the big brand, so he was comparing people to Tommy. And he was also hawking a CD-ROM where he could like explain more about this stuff to you. And so at that time, he was really talking about using a couple of tools to cultivate a personal brand. Email and sort of rudimentary personal websites. Now, obviously, we have any number of sites and apps that we can use to do that sort of thing. And I think the impulse, Facebook wants to say, like, people use Facebook because they love, connecting with their communities and their families and their friends. But oftentimes, I think when it comes to personal branding, we're motivated by fear. So, for example, I had this conversation with a friend who has a very strong personal brand. And I said, do I have to be on LinkedIn? Because I hate LinkedIn and I really don't want to be on it. And all I get is like garbage messages from people. And she was like, well, you don't have to be on LinkedIn. But if you are on LinkedIn, that is one more result in your Google, when people search for you on Google, that you control, as opposed to somebody else. So now I'm on LinkedIn now, but don't message me on it because I never log into it. So my fear is based on the reason that I sort of cultivate all of these things is because I have these enemies that I'm trying to best on the internet. One of my nemeses is Amanda Hesser, who I've met her, and she's a very lovely person. But she's my nemesis because people usually, they'll often mistake me for her and vice versa. So for a long time, when you Googled my name, Google would pipe in Amanda Hesser's Wikipedia page, even though, I would understand that if we literally had the same name, but it's not even the same name. I also, sometimes people write like mean articles about me that put my name in the headline, and so I'm trying to beat those people. There was also an Amanda Hess. I don't know if you heard this story. She was in labor and she stopped to deliver somebody else's baby before she had her baby, and so she's this wonderful person. So I'm trying to destroy her in my Google results, and then sometimes I'll do an event and somebody will take my photo and I'll look weird, and so I feel like I have to put more photos on the internet that I find flattering to get rid of those, and so this is like how my fear motivates itself. But this whole time that I've been thinking, it's like Amanda Hesser who I'm fighting. I'm really fighting this information war with Facebook and Google and all of these other companies that I'm just like giving, not just the data that I think I'm giving them, about how great I am and how you should hire me to write an article, but also, the weird thing that I go look at on the internet after I leave LinkedIn or whatever. So in a lot of ways, we're sort of motivated by fear, and we think we're fighting one battle when really we don't know that we're fighting another. So the second front that I want to talk about is our politics. So last year I made a series of videos with the New York Times called Interneting with Amanda Hess. Again, personal branding, very strong. And this is the first one we made, and it's about how we all share political memes, or at least how we did in the 2016 election. And we're going to watch it right now. It's about 4 minutes.
The internet can make you feel like you have all of this control over the political... Oh, wait, sorry. How does this... Wait, did I just lose?
Internet with Amanda Hess.
All images sourced from the internet.
Pokemon go to the polls.
Hillary Clinton was famously one of the least charismatic politicians.
I'm just chilling in Cedar Rapids.
But on the internet, her image took on a life of its own. It's almost as if Hillary's fans breathed charisma into her on social media. Hillary often seemed at her most charismatic in GIF form, when her most charming moments could be put on endless loop and passed around as totems of her character. Meanwhile, Hillary's detractors were working in the opposite direction, isolating moments that made her look deranged, ugly, and sick. This is political candidate as avatar. We're no longer just analyzing how candidates express themselves. We want to express ourselves through them. On the internet, our support of candidates is being encoded through these moments where they seem to represent us, not as actual political representatives voting for our interests, but as people acting how we'd like to imagine ourselves acting.
I'm reclaiming my time, yeah.
Memes put a new twist on the old idea of charismatic authority in politics. Charismatic leaders used to imbue themselves with mythos, claiming to possess special qualities and cults of personality around themselves. But on the internet, a lot of that work has been transferred to citizens who take their leaders' tics and blow them up into superhuman form. And as they do it, they're creating really strong tribal and emotional ties around those personalities. If you make a meme about a candidate and then they become president, it can feel like you created a piece of the presidential persona, like a part of you is president. Memes give us the power to build leaders' personalities or destroy them. We used to talk about gaffes. The idea seems quaint now.
Grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it.
There's no longer any fixed idea of a candidate to be disrupted by a gaffe.
Such a nasty woman.
Trust fund.
Our conception of politicians is now made up of sets of competing, polarized memes. Any moment can be manipulated into a positive or negative depending on your allegiance. And because memes can morph to accommodate almost any position, it's easier than ever to take candidates' images and twist them to our own ends. Facts don't matter to memes. The meme of this confused blonde lady started out as pictures of a Brazilian soap actress contemplating her character's inner turmoil in jail. But when people started superimposing math equations on her face, she turned into a symbol of confusion or deep conspiratorial calculations. The Babadook was a horrifying movie villain before he was pushed in front of a rainbow flag and restyled as a fabulous gay icon. Because memes don't need to grapple with reality, they spread a lot faster than typical forms of political speech. And in presidential politics, we've never seen anyone benefit from this more
You are fake news.
than Donald Trump. Trump had no clear ideology, the vaguest sketches of ideas, a bottomless thirst for attention, and a flair for drama, the perfect base for endless memeing. His campaign rallies became like incubators for ideas with viral potential. Think about the defining meme of Trumpism.
We need to build a wall.
It never made any practical sense that the United States would build a 2,000-mile wall and that Mexico would pay for it, but
Beautiful wall.
anytime reality tried to get in the way, Trump would double down on the meme.
10 feet higher. The wall just got 10 feet higher.
For his biggest fans, Trump himself is the ultimate meme. They've become so invested in promoting his persona that his promises have become almost irrelevant, like outdated versions of a meme that have been replaced by the next amusing thing. That's the seductive danger of democracy as meme. It can make us feel like we have more personal control over a politician, but it's the politician who is seizing the real power, becoming immune to criticism, and less accountable to us.
Next time on Enrichment, why beauty acts feel ugly.
Okay. So right now, a lot of what we're talking about is how Russian trolls, fed memes to Facebook and Americans shared them. But it's not like the Russian trolls were performing brain surgery. I don't know if you've seen any of the images of the actual memes that they shared, but they weren't even like the best ones. And so I think what we need to remember is that this was a nudge from them as opposed to like a push. They were capitalizing on a dynamic that already existed, and they were basically using platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Reddit, not in a way where they were hacking it or where there was any type of breach, but they were using those platforms in the way that they were made to be used fundamentally. And so, if we put these two fronts together, so our war to create our personal personas and then our war to get our candidates elected, it's now becoming clear that there are these actors, whether it's the Russian trolls or the data firm Cambridge Analytica, that are leveraging these things, our personal data and our partisanship, to pit us against each other. So when we're on the internet, it can often feel like it's Amanda Hess versus Amanda Hesser, or it's Hillary versus Trump. But beneath that, it's often, I think, it's all of us versus Facebook and Google. It's Trump and Facebook versus democracy. And one irony, I think, when people talk about Russian trolls and their disinformation campaigns, often more than any particular outcome, they're looking to sow discord and distrust in our political structures and our processes. And I think they have succeeded in that. And that can be a very dangerous thing, I think, if it leads us to apathy, if it makes us less inclined to vote because we don't think the process is fair. But I think it can also be a good thing for us to really be aware of and consider the ways in which our governments are failing to uphold the letter and the spirit of democracy, and also how these big companies like Facebook, which are increasingly acting like governments, are doing so with none of the sort of liabilities or responsibilities that go along with that. I think, now Mark Zuckerberg is just beginning to realize that we are interested in talking about this. So hopefully this goes in the good direction as opposed to the bad one. But we're just starting to grapple with it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Hey, thank you. I guess one of the benefits of going third is that most of the things have been said already. So I'm going to try to fill in some of the gaps and then talk a bit about what we can do about it, since there's been a whole lot of pessimism so far. The way to think about what's going on, and Peter talked about this a little bit, is that everything is becoming a computer. The world is changing. We used to have no computers and then things with computers in them. Now we have computers with things attached to them. So your refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold. Your microwave oven is a computer that makes things hot. Your car is a computer with 4 wheels and an engine. And that changes the world in some very important ways. Computers produce data. Computers are on the internet. And computer security, which used to be sort of over there where the computers were, now becomes everything security. And what we're talking about here is what happens when that change occurs. Now, we've been doing computer security for a bunch of decades, and there are some lessons that we have from our world that now matter everywhere. And I'll talk about a few of them. First is that software is not very good. We actually don't know how to write secure software. Actually, more importantly, we don't know how to write secure software at a price you're willing to pay. We can write much better software, and we often do for NASA spacecraft, for aircraft, but we don't for home applications, which are becoming everything. And that you see this when you see how often your software is updated, and how often you see updates, security patches. We're actually not much better than that. And there are some basic reasons why that's so. The second thing is that complex systems are hard to secure. The more complex a system is, the harder it is to make it secure. Right now, the internet's probably the most complex machine mankind has ever built, and it really just barely works. And as these systems get more complex, there's a lot more insecurities. I think we mentioned the notion that the attack surface gets bigger. There's more ways in. Again, there's a lot of intricacies here. But basically, as we add complexity, we're losing security. The third thing, and I think is really important about computers, is that they're fundamentally extensible. And by that, I mean that you can't constrain their functionality, unlike the real world. And so when I was a kid, I had a telephone in my home, big black thing with a cord attached to the wall. It was a great phone, but no matter how hard you tried, or anybody tried, it couldn't be anything other than a phone. That's what it was. Right? This is not a phone. This is a computer with a phone attached, and it can do anything you want. Right? That's what "there's an app for that" means. So that means this device is much harder to secure than that old black telephone. Right? Features get added to it all the time, by me when I download new apps, possibly by attackers when they install malware. I mean, all malware is additional feature for your phone or a computer that you didn't ask for and don't want. Right? In a way that you can't do that to that old phone. But when you heard about the notion of ransomware for thermostats or cars, that's why that's a problem now, and it wasn't 10 years ago. Because the cars today are extensible. If you own a Tesla, you get security patches downloaded overnight that are automatically installed. Because it's a computer. Other cars are getting there. They're still, lower on the sophistication. There are also new vulnerabilities in the interconnections. As we connect systems to each other, vulnerabilities appear where they're not when the systems are disconnected. So you'll see things like a casino in Las Vegas that was hacked through, and actually not making this up, its internet-connected fish tank. Or Target Corporation, a very big data breach that made the news a few years ago, where the attack centered on the HVAC contractor for several mid-Pennsylvania stores. Right, allowed hackers to get into the network and into the payments network. And these interconnections add to our problems. The last thing about computers, which isn't really true in the real world, is that attacks always get better and cheaper. I think there's attacks flow downhill. Right, today's top secret NSA programs become tomorrow's PhD theses and the next day's hacker tools. That you see this democratization of tactics. And you can't say, this is something a government can do, and this is lower, because things go down. When North Korea attacked Sony in 2014, there was actually a legitimate debate in my community about whether the attack was perpetrated by a nation state with a $20 billion military budget or a couple of guys in the basement somewhere. Right, that is not a joke. That was a serious debate, and we didn't know the answer because it could have been either. And a lot of these sophisticated government attacks we see actually aren't that sophisticated. And you do see this blending of criminal attacks going up, political attacks going down. We see nation states that engage in criminal activity. We see criminals doing politics. This very much blending up and down this stack as these vulnerabilities get easier. And lots of examples of this. So I think last week, for the first time ever, the Department of Homeland Security acknowledged that there were Stingrays, basically fake cell phone towers in D.C. run by somebody else doing we don't know what. Now, there's a long story here. Stingray is the trade name of a device used by the FBI to collect identities of cell phones in the vicinity. It turns out your cell phone doesn't have a lot of security built in who it trusts. If someone says, I'm a cell phone tower, your phone will say, great, this is my name. And it was designed that way because back when it was designed, it was hard to create a fake cell phone tower. And for many years, the FBI used this as very, very much a secret program. But attacks flow downhill. And in 2011, there was an article in the Washington Post pointing out that there were a few dozen of these in D.C. run by we don't know who. And it's a great map they showed. A bunch centered on the White House, a bunch centered on Congress. There's several running up Embassy Row. And if you want to do this, actually, you can buy yourself one of these things. They're on sale on Alibaba.com for about $1,000. If you own a software-defined radio card, you can plug it into your laptop and download software and build it yourself if you are inclined. This is just one example of the threats going downhill. So at the same time, as these things are happening, we're losing some of our sort of standard ways we get security. So patching is how we get security in computers. We don't know how to make them secure. So we built this system that when there are problems, we fix them quickly. Right? So you get patches all the time, second Tuesday a month on your Windows machine, regularly on your iPhone, regularly on Apple. And that works pretty well. That is going to fail as these devices permeate more of our lives. And the reason they work on this device is a team of engineers at Apple writing these patches. They're actually doing two things. They're designing this to be very secure in the first place. And when a vulnerability appears, they work overtime to create a patch and push it onto your phone. That doesn't work for low-cost devices. We learned this in the denial of service attack of last year, where vulnerabilities in webcams and routers and digital video recorders were used to create a massive botnet. Now, those vulnerabilities were severe because the teams that designed them really didn't have the expertise and didn't care very much. In many cases, they're unpatchable. I mean, the way we patch your digital video recorder is we throw it away and buy a new one. That is the only patch mechanism. And that's because the economics of that doesn't allow for the same dedicated teams that work at Apple and Microsoft and these other big companies. So that's failing. The other thing that is failing is authentication. Our devices talk to each other because they authenticate. We authenticate to Facebook. We authenticate to our phones. My phone authenticates to my car. And there are a bunch of protocols for this, mediated by us. And you've all done these. As we get more things, the amount of authentication will explode exponentially. Right? 100 things, authenticating 100 things is suddenly 10,000 authentications. And we can't be in the middle of those. Right? There'll be some ways to fake it. I mean, right now, your phone is really a central hub. If you own an IoT anything, almost certainly you're controlling it from your phone. But that only is going to work in this middle area. And we're not sure how to do authentication at scale. A lot of the failures we see are failures in authentication. Either people doing it badly. When you think of the hack of the Democratic National Committee, John Podesta's email, right? He authenticated to a fake site who grabbed his credentials, stole his emails. Or we see things authenticating to things in ways that fail, like the Dyn botnet, that if there are default passwords and other sort of other failures. This is going to get worse, and this is going to get more real. So in computer security, we tend to talk about the CIA Triad, which is actually not that CIA. Stands for confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. So the three things we want out of security. I want my data to be private. I don't want anybody to change it without me knowing it. And I want it to be available when I want it. Now, mostly we've been concerned about privacy. Right? Throughout the past couple of decades, privacy has been our concern. As the internet moves into the real world, authentication and availability become more important. Right? I mean, I really don't want someone to hack into the hospital and steal my medical data. But it'll be much, much worse if they change my blood type. Right? I don't want someone to hack into my car, use the navigation system or the microphone to spy on me, but I really don't want them to disable the brakes. So suddenly you have the same vulnerabilities causing very different results. Right? On the one hand, my spreadsheet crashes and I lose my data. On the other hand, my implanted heart defibrillator crashes and I lose my life. And I think this difference, which is what Peter said, will make an enormous difference in the way we think about computers and the internet. I mean, right now, if you heard the Zuckerberg hearings yesterday, you saw a Congress that has absolutely no stomach for regulating tech. I mean, they have strong words, they're pissed off, but they're not going to do anything. We saw the same thing when Equifax got breached. Right? A lot of strong words, but nothing happening. I think that changes when you start seeing property damage and lives lost. So, while there are a lot of risks here, I think there's enormous promise in government involvement. The thing that's been missing is government. That we've allowed tech to do what it wants, how it wants, because it didn't matter. Because it was cat and Star Trek conversations. And now it's not going to be that. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what government regulation would look like in cyberspace. And I usually talk to a very libertarian tech audience, and I tell them, look, your choice is no longer government involvement or no government involvement. It's smart government involvement versus stupid government involvement. So what does smart government involvement look like? Well, I think it looks like several things. I think we need to see standards of security in things, in data, in connections. And we can have a conversation about what that would look like. But there needs to be some standards that are adhered to. You're going to see some regulation, sometimes prescribing specific rules like the speed limit is X, sometimes being more general that, in inclement weather you should drive at a safe speed. You will see an insurance market which will impose its own rules. You will see labeling requirements like we see for cars or appliances or food. Not so that we all can read them and make smart decisions, because largely the details will be over our head, but so that other organizations can read them and make recommendations to us. If you're going to have a consumer reports-like organization looking at internet security for objects in our world, they're going to need information. Right now, Mark Zuckerberg will go to Congress and be very apologetic about the security Facebook has, but he will not give details of what it is. Just like nobody will. And so you're going to see, I think, more transparency measures. You're going to see more government involvement in critical infrastructure. That as we move sort of up the stack from things in our home to things in our city, in our communities, in our cities, in our country, that, Zuckerberg said that we're in an arms race with Russia. He's been used that term a lot, and you could see it in his notes. In a lot of ways, Facebook versus Russia is not a fair fight. It's not Facebook's job to combat Russian government attacks. It really is the US government job to combat foreign government attacks. And I think you're going to see a lot more blending of government and critical companies, whether they be social media companies or power companies or transportation companies or communication companies. And we might not like this, but I think it's happening. Right? You see a lot of arguments against this, that certainly more government involvement will inhibit innovation. I think that's true, and I think we're going to accept that. There'll be a point where we will say unfettered innovation is too dangerous. We say it now in pharmaceuticals. We say it in aircraft. And there'll be a point we're going to say it on the internet. That we don't want the new thing every 3 months because it's too dangerous. It'll be an interesting conversation because there's a lot of power aligned with this libertarian don't regulate us. I see Zuckerberg warming up to regulation. And that leads to the second worry, is that regulation done badly favors the incumbents. I wonder if Zuckerberg is making the calculation that regulation now means that only I will be, and a few others, will be able to afford the resources necessary to comply. Right now we're looking at Europe, instituting some very strong privacy regulations, also security. And it's be interesting to watch how that flows into the US. Because in a lot of ways, we're one world. When you buy a car, the car you buy in the US is not the same car you buy in Mexico, because environmental regulations are different, and the automobile manufacturers make different cars for different markets. On the other hand, the car you buy in California is the same car you buy in Nevada, even though California has different environmental regulations. And it's going to be interesting to watch where the internet companies go. Will it be better to make one thing and sell it everywhere, in which case sort of the best regulations apply worldwide, or will the internet split into 1,000 pieces and the Facebook you get in the United States is not the Facebook you get in Europe? It remains to be seen. But I very much think that what we need to do now is have a serious national conversation about what regulating this space will look like. Because the alternative is something will happen. There'll be a disaster. Not a Facebook disaster, not a Dyn disaster, not a disaster with your data, but a disaster that kills people, and that Congress will do something. And if you listen to the questions Congress asked today, you know that they have no idea how the internet works. And the last thing we want is for them to figure out what to do. So with that, I want to call up the rest of the panel. We're going to go over there, and we're going to have a conversation and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So we covered a lot of ground, and I will ask some of the questions that are burning on my mind, but you guys, I hope you were taking notes and plan to ask questions, because we'll have time to get audience involvement. So Bruce was just talking about the promises and risks of regulation. And then you ended, Bruce, with, I think, an astute observation that many of our Congress people don't seem to understand how the internet functions, what it is composed of. I often think of that famous line from Senator Stevens, it's just a series of tubes, which is actually truer than we made fun of him for.
It's totally not fair.
But I wanted to, with that, I'd like to ask you, Peter, do you think, you live and work in DC, do you think that there is a faction of our government who understands this cyber risk in a real way? The nation state risk, but also the conflating of cyber criminals and nation state actors. And they are in a secret room somewhere working on this at a high level that we can feel comfortable and confident about.
I think we're in a very different place than where we were a couple years ago if you'd asked that question. You have a greater amount of awareness of the challenges. And again, you're aware. It might be certainly the Pentagon. I mean, if we go back to 2008, we didn't have a cyber command.
Right.
Now we have a cyber command, an entire military organization for figuring out how to fight in this space and defend in it. We go to DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Again, from nothing to now. Is it enough? No, but we're in a much better position than we were before to, look at the OMB, went from sharing all of our information in one of these, another one of these.
Personnel management,
yeah,
is that what you mean?
Yeah, sorry, OPM.
Yeah.
Even I get the acronym screwed up,
Right.
and I'm from DC. Went from one of these mega breaches to now it's got more talent there. Congress, a lot of bad questions. I was actually talking with someone else that it's a shame. Hearings are where you see how good or bad, how smart or not that representative and or their staff is. It really shines through, and yet they have no consequence to that person's election or not. It's a strange disconnect, right?
Yeah.
But again, there is a lot of talent. There is some awareness of it. I think the challenge is going to be I'm in violent agreement with Bruce points, particularly when it comes to the aspect of we're going to see more and more of a call for action. We're even seeing private industry change its mind on regulation, where it used to say, I don't want any regulation at all in this space, to after they experience a lot of these different things, whether it's third-party breaches, like, hey, I'm doing really good at cybersecurity, but this other one is not, and I paid the consequence to it, to hold it. I don't like the fact that I've got one set of rules in New York and a different set of rules in California. Federal government, just just tell me what to do. They've changed their mind, but we do have a kind of philosophic challenge here where there is an ideology that's caught between we want good security and hold it, there's no role for the government whatsoever. Government, you are bad. And I think that debate we're going to see continue to play out in kind of the politics of cybersecurity over the next couple of years. It's the same thing on the international level where we say on one hand, hey, cybersecurity is global, we're never going to get after it until we work with a bunch of other nations, to, hey, we don't work with other nations.
Yeah.
And that disconnect is going to be really interesting to follow in the next couple of years.
Well, and I mean, Bruce, you can speak to this, and Amanda as well. The cybersecurity community has this background of being anti-regulation and being like, we do it ourselves, iconoclasts, which maybe is something that we are going to have to grapple with as a community. But Amanda, I wanted to ask you about how we use the internet, as you were talking about, and the ways in which we really are the weakest link. Bruce was mentioning, how the Target hack, they got in with people in, was it Nebraska, you were saying?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, huh?
Same difference.
So, somewhere in the middle. And I think in a lot of these hacks, it is one human being at a computer that is the weakest link that then allows these actors to get into a network. But you said something that really struck me, which was that memes, because they don't have to grapple with reality, move much quicker.
I feel like there's a foreboding.
Yes, like but they move much more quickly, and people see them so much more. And I worry that speaks to this kind of post-fact era that we are in, that also makes us even more vulnerable, because when people try to give us advice on like how to protect ourselves, we don't hear it because we don't know what's true. Is that something that worries you?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
What can we do about it? Like, how can we, I think as journalists, our job, Amanda and I are both journalists, our job is to like convey facts to people and call these guys and get their opinions and then give it to people. But I'm finding it hard to get people to know when we're giving them the truth. How does the information war for truth make this harder?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons that we started making videos, actually, and videos that look like the internet and feel like the internet. They're vertical, so they're made to watch on your phone. And one of the most wonderful things that I found as a result of those videos is that children watch them. So children don't read my articles typically. I don't hear
Maybe
from a
that's
lot
a good
of
thing.
children who are very interested in reading them. But I have heard from many parents who say, like, my kid is sitting on the floor, like, singing your theme song. And I'm like, that sounds really annoying, but I'm really glad that they're doing that. So I think, this is sort of like, I think, a big question in politics when it comes to a candidate like Trump. Like, should leftists or liberals or centrists, like, put up a candidate who's just, like, a very shiny, very entertaining
Like
person,
memeable.
yeah, but also happens to like have personal integrity. And there's a there's a point at which those two things don't intersect, right? So, for example, when we're making the videos, we want to keep them under 4 minutes, because even that, people won't watch the whole video. It's too long, and that means that there's simply like less information in the videos than there would be in a typical 1,000-word article that I would write. There's more visual information, but often that could, I think, even be distracting, like, from the point. So at the times we're trying to sort of figure out what to do with that too, like how much we want to try to get people in the door to like deliver facts to them.
Yeah. And meet them where they are.
Yeah.
Like, surprise, we have a fact on Snapchat.
Right.
Yeah, and Bruce, I'm curious, what do you think is the next big weakness that we, as we're using the internet, are not realizing we're participating in?
Yeah, I think we've seen, and you saw this in sort of all the talks, the threats sort of going up the stack, that we used to attack the hardware of computers. And that's sort of like the 60s and 70s. And then we moved into the software. And now the good attacks are against the people.
Yeah.
And the attacks against us. And whether it is fake news that we want to believe, so we believe, or we transmit because even though we don't care whether it's true because it signifies who our tribe is, or it's phishing emails or ransomware, they're really attacks against us that matter less how they're coming to us and need us to participate. And that's the top. I very much push back against the people are the weakest link, because while it's true, it's a cop-out. That we in computer security love to blame people when we design things badly. So here's some security advice that you get. Don't put USB sticks in your computer.
Yeah.
What should I do with them? They're USB sticks. You'll hear, don't click on a link. It's a link. Right? That's what passes as advice these days. And if we can't design a USB system where you can plug something in and have it be safe, or we can't design URLs that you can't click on, why are we even here? So I think that we need a lot more thinking in how to, in the user. I mean, that's where the risks are, and that's really where the advances are.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm in agreement with you on the idea that we users of the internet aren't going to be the ones who can fix this problem, and
we're doing our best.
Yeah, and we are, but it's impossible. You know, when Cambridge Analytica's when the data breach of Facebook data from Cambridge Analytica happened, Facebook was like, we are a victim here. We were the ones, we never agreed to have the data taken in that regard, but there's no way that as a user, I could have known or protected myself. If someone was going to protect me and all of us who are on Facebook, it needed to be Facebook. And we wrote the story at Wired about internet-connected baby monitors. I was thinking about as you were talking, and people didn't believe us because what we were talking about was that people would buy these baby monitors that would connect to their phone, as you said, most IoT devices do, and hackers would hack in and spy on or scare people's children for no real reason other than like shits and giggles, or also maybe because they wanted, pardon my French, or maybe because they wanted to find out if you were home or get into your computer network. And that's basically just a default. That was a problem of defaults, default settings, that there was no password on those devices. What can we as consumers and people here today, if we're going to buy a Internet of Things device, do? Is there any good advice?
So funny, I actually did research baby monitors for the book I'm writing, and it turns out there's nothing you can do. I mean, I was reading websites and reading the manufacturer's claims, and they made no sense even to me. That there's a lot of platitudes, there's no real information. Yeah. And this is what you say about Facebook, your email on Gmail. Our data is in other people's hands, and there's nothing we can do. The advice I can give you is don't have a Facebook account, don't have an email address, don't have a credit card, don't have a cell phone, which is basically dumb advice. But as soon as you have those things, you rely on the others. I mean, there's advice around the edges, but in the end, your data is no longer under your control.
Right.
Your devices are no longer under control.
Which speaks so much to what Amanda was saying. I mean, that even when we think we're controlling our data or controlling the information that's out there, we're actually just putting more information out there that's out of our control.
Yeah, I mean, so Tim Wu has written about the idea of convenience being king on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just hackers who want us to unthinkingly click on a link,
right,
or open an attachment. The entire internet is oriented towards us, unthinkingly using all of these products that are designed that way. And so hackers and, companies like Facebook are thinking in the same way in that sense.
Yeah. Peter?
I want to get on a couple of these. The first, you asked, what can we do? And we're acting like we're very helpless here. And part of it stems from, we all had a good chuckle at Congress, but actually, the joke's on us.
Yeah.
Yes.
We I can't remember the exact figure, but it's over 60% of the users of Facebook don't understand how Facebook makes money. And that was played out through all the debates, all the questions at the hearing. We know how a grocery store makes money. We know how a car company makes money, and yet this product that is at the center of the decisions on what car to buy, to who to vote for, we don't know how it makes money. So one is an ignorance aspect of it. The other is we are the consumers and customers and arguably kind of the citizens of this digital empire that Zuckerberg runs, and yet we make very little demands of it. And we do know that when we make demands, that is actually what causes Facebook to change policy.
Right.
You can see this play out in something that you've written on in terms of like Twitter goes from saying we are the free speech wing of the free speech party. We're going to do nothing at all about everything from extremists on our networks to harassment to gradually pressure builds on them from their customer base, and they begrudgingly and don't do enough, but they do act. And you're seeing the same thing happening within Facebook right now. So one, it's to understand the services that we use, and two, to make demands on them that we've not been willing to. And that's in part what Congress is doing. It's reacting, it's kind of serving as us as representatives here, either in its ignorance or in the slow demands that it's starting to make. But I wanted to hit one other thing that was cutting across this of how do we persuade? How do you as a writer?
Right.
We need to get rid of the idea that veracity is the most important thing. It's virality. Whether it goes viral or not wins out on whether it is factual or not.
You mean just from a human psyche perspective?
From a human psyche, from an editorial, from a writer, from a politician's perspective. That is what a Donald Trump, that is what a Taylor Swift, that is what an ISIS all understand. And
Taylor Swift really losing out in that
now, but her
comparison.
Her rise is from a very deft use of social media and understanding kind of the same basic rules of a faux authenticity. An authenticity, I say faux because it's both real. She, Trump, ISIS's top recruiter are all engaging on an interpersonal level, but they're also doing it in front of a crowd.
Yeah. Well, so are you saying that the way that we as citizens on the internet can protect ourselves from information warfare is by being on the offense?
It's understanding you're part of the battle. You're both a target in the battle, your eyes, and your clicks determine who wins or not. So you can, you can be a pawn who's an ignorant pawn, or you can be a player.
So okay, that's scary, but also important. And I think from a journalistic perspective, also, it's upsetting as a journalist to hear, you need to prize virality over veracity because that's just against everything we're taught.
But
it is
headline
true.
writers know that.
Yeah, we do. And also Facebook taught our industry that.
Right.
Or, I mean, we already did know, but Facebook really drove it home that if the more you can package a journalistic endeavor to share on Facebook, the more people will see it.
But real quickly, one of the other elements of virality is narrative, telling a good story.
Right.
And it's emotion, provoking. These are all elements a good journalists do, as opposed to just saying the facts of the matter, the facts of the matter. And that's what good politicians do now, is have a narrative, and they have an emotion that provokes online. And the point is the telegraph changed the way we communicated. Television changed the way we communicated, and communicated in terms of sold and sold wars, sold products. Social media has changed it, and we can not like it, but that's the reality of it.
Right. Okay, well, should we take it to your questions, guys? We don't have that much time, so I think we can go to the audience. Not that we can see you, but okay.
There's an audience. There they are.
There you are.
Hello. We'll have our first question right here in the front.
So I actually wanted to expand a little bit by asking about what we were just talking about. And if by focusing so much on foreign actors and foreign state actors, we aren't ignoring the fact that the war is in fact already occurring here domestically. Peter, you mentioned the Ukraine as sort of this test case for Russia, but we've had an ongoing test case and war cases from a civil perspective here within the United States. I've published work on this as well in regards to how the Gamergate Collective would use these tactics. Once upon a time, online activism would sort of rise someone from within their own ranks as a broadcast method. But now you can just choose a celebrity, and if you engage that celebrity with your online activism, then they become a point of broadcast. Are we not sort of overlooking the role that we're already actively playing in this civil war sort of amongst ourselves with this focus?
I'll jump in first on that.
Yeah.
Complete agreement. So when I was referring to Ukraine as a test case in terms of the cyber war side, it was the very, we've long talked about what if someone hacks the power grid. In Ukraine, it was finally done. And then, so both test, it works, but the can I get away with it, they did get away with it with no consequence. What you're hitting is the other part of what we were talking about in the Q&A of on the information warfare side, the influence operation side. One of these other changes is that there's no longer a domestic election. You have a melding of not just the tactics, but literally kind of the people. Alt-right and Russian trolls, the elements that you were pointing out in your video, both of them are using some of the same memes, they're using the same imagery, they're drawing upon each other, and we saw that in the election too. You see it in the reaction to Charlottesville, and what they're doing though is that they're accelerating the other's efforts when they act in alignment, and again, that changes the way we have to think about this space. So as Bruce was talking, Facebook said, their cybersecurity efforts, their team was focused on people hacking Facebook.
Right.
It was looking in the wrong place. It was the conversation was being hacked on Facebook.
Yeah, but you have to. I worry less about the hackers and more about the legitimate users. I mean, in a sense, this is Facebook's business model. I think the reason that we have outrage with Cambridge Analytica and what happened is because it was Donald Trump. He wants someone to blame. If this was Kellogg's selling breakfast cereal, we would all be impressed by their marketing campaign. This is the business of surveillance capitalism. And I worry less about the Ukraines and the hackers and more about what is legal and acceptable and considered okay right now. I think there's much greater source of harm there. I mean, nothing in Amanda's video was illegal.
Yeah, and I think we actually did see a lot of, I think the media was very impressed when Barack Obama used social media in his campaign. And obviously we weren't talking about the same sort of issues, but you can see very quickly when the tide turns how we wake up to how, that may not be so impressive. It might be a little bit actually scary.
Well, and to your point about Gamergate, I mean, it took a really long time for the victims of Gamergate to get anyone to care. Yeah. Because, women gamers were like, people are threatening to kill me. They're sending SWAT teams to my house. And even, the mainstream media, we were late to the story.
Well, and I think that one of the big concerns there, and I think one of the big concerns there is that however Gamergate has been characterized, the tactics and the operational strategies that were employed there have been propagated. They've been democratized, to use Bruce's term, across a number of different online activist organizations now.
Absolutely.
And those tactics have become perfected, and their domestic use sort of increases the level of concern of the domestic misinformation, disinformation warfare that is occurring.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the media also, another one we missed was Pizzagate. Pizzagate was like a joke at first, and then it became, somebody got shot. And I think you're right. Those were some of the same tactics, and it's important that we learn from them.
Well, and to this learning, it's not just learning, is that in every aspect, people react to incentives. So it either, what I do either works or doesn't work. So for the people involved in Gamergate, for the most part, it worked for them. I mean, the people carrying out the attacks, the harassment at low cost, to Pizzagate, one of the key figures in propagating it was subsequently invited to the White House. So what is the incentive? What is the message that was taken from that? And so again, we won't see this change until the incentives change. And it's much like what, we're having kind of a discussion on what you post online and the social media side, but it's the same thing what Bruce is saying with, internet connected cameras. Those companies will continue to make them insecure until the incentive structures, whether it's legislation or lawsuits, alters that. That's the only thing that will change it.
And do you think that regulation can play a role in disincentivizing harassment?
We are seeing that play out right now in terms of we've seen in Europe. We went from companies, be it Twitter or Facebook, saying, I've got no responsibility for what plays on my network, to, okay, I'm going to intervene. Originally it was, the start of this is child porn. Then it moves into terrorism and violence, beheading videos, to then it is extremism. And originally it's focused just on ISIS. And then we go, okay, hold it, after Charlottesville, maybe we should add in neo-Nazis. And then we see in Europe legislation that says, you've got 24 hours to take down violent imagery, and if you don't, you pay a fine. That's what these companies are reacting to, and we'll see what plays out in the United States. And then again, alongside this is, we're Americans. We don't just do legislation, we do lawsuits. And so you see, a bunch of lawsuits around this. So if I'm Facebook, I'm scared of legislation coming from Congress, but maybe to Bruce's point, maybe I want it because I also have a class action lawsuit coming from victims of Cambridge Analytica, so maybe I want legislation because that gets me out of that problem.
That's really interesting.
Great. So we're going to move on to the next question here in the center.
Thank you so much for the talk. My question is for Bruce. What's your opinion on decentralized networks and blockchain on data security? Is that the next beacon of hope?
So I think there's a lot of value in decentralization. I'm less keen on blockchain simply because there's a lot more hype than reality. That blockchain solves a very specific problem. If you don't have that problem, it's not a good solution. Decentralization in general, I think, is something we've lost. I think we were much more secure when there were 10,000 ISPs and when there were 6. And that, or when everyone had their own web page instead of everyone on Facebook. And then there are moves to head back in that direction. The market favors the large. A whole bunch of reasons why the big get bigger. We'll spend a whole hour on that. But I think there is security value in decentralization. That the single large platforms, whether they're Facebook or email or a single power company or 3 airlines, or is a vulnerability. Now, it's more expensive. A lot of this is what are we willing to pay? I mean, the solutions all up and down this table are going to cost money. And how do we pay it? Do we pay it in paying for services? Do we pay it in tax that goes into government intervention? Depending on your politics, you'll pick different ways, but security will come at a cost.
Is decentralization the future?
It is part of the future.
What other technologies do you think will impact?
I think it's all of them. I mean, I don't have this technology will save us. Technologies tend to change things rather than save us. I really look at the people right now as the missing link. And people and we'll use technologies, but it's not going to be technologies in charge anymore. We have allowed programmers to code the world as they saw fit. We've given them that special right in society. We did it because it didn't matter. It actually didn't matter at all what your Friendster page looked like. Nobody cared. Right? Now suddenly it matters. And I think that enthronement of tech as the designer of our reality is just going to end. And it's going to be a lot of different technologies, but it's not going to be technologically driven anymore.
Next question to your left.
If you can, assuming that you can agree on criteria for the health of a country's politics and various institutions like education and the press, have the political attacks been faring worse in countries where all of these things are healthier? So, for example, just living here in the United States, sure, it looks like Russia hacked the election, but even my conversations with savvy people weren't really going any better. Whereas if I were living someplace where maybe there was less income disparity, where the government traditionally cared about all people, where the press, I know there are a couple of journalists up there, but where the press would be more likely to jump on a candidate who was making an outright lie. I'm just wondering if those sorts of countries would, the people would be more likely to just say, this is nonsense.
So let me just translate your question back to you to make sure I'm understanding it the right way. Are you saying if we were in a country where our democratic institutions across the board, the press, our education system, where those things were healthier, would we be less at risk of this kind of manipulation?
Yes.
Okay. Peter?
So essentially, you can think of it as extremes. So, as you framed it, we have the situation in the United States, but a far worse case example of what has played out is a situation like Myanmar or the Philippines, where we've seen the same kind of dynamics of hacking and influence operations and actual fake news playing out, and it's driving mass killings and the like. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a situation like the Baltics and Estonia now, where they have not just a very vibrant digital economy, and what's interesting, way more convenient than so way more convenient, but they also have elements of not just greater kind of classic cybersecurity, but their society is more resilient against these kind of influence operations. Political ads are, it's evident they're not as frequent, and it's legislatively enforced who's behind it. Their government makes a special effort to warn society of incoming foreign information attacks in much the same way like we get warnings of bad weather. Digital literacy is taught in their schools, so kids are given very early on training in trying to understand what's true and what's not true online. So that's kind of, I think, the positive scenario, as opposed to there's a much worse one. What's interesting to me to this digital literacy example is the United States government actually paid for a digital literacy campaign into the Ukraine to help Ukrainian students better understand what's truthful or not online. We don't pay for that for our own kids.
Next question in the center section.
So relating to that, I think a little bit, so you were on about how you don't think people in Congress seem to really understand how things work. And I was thinking, so this seems to be that like recent events are part of the reason why events like this is taking place and why people are showing up to this kind of stuff. They wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, I think. And it just made me think of how the war on terror seemed to be partly pressed by the public becoming aware and raising demands towards Congress, for instance. And it just seems, maybe you were mentioning this post-fact era, Emily, and that as opposed to back with the war on terror, where people had an idea of what the problem was and what they could demand, I don't know, the right to protect themselves. They could demand things from the military. here people don't understand what they need to protect themselves against. So for instance, in Denmark, it's now, if you enter a Danish website, there'll be a warning that it is using internet cookies, because cookies are dangerous, because people are scared of cookies. When they're not dangerous, they're just for the functioning of the website, but now there are warnings against it because that's what the public demanded. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the public knowledge and how that might, the influence of public knowledge on governance and on what Congress is discussing.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing this earlier that as right now, because of social media and the amplification that it can have of awareness or campaigns, it does seem that Congress is listening. Like when something trends on Twitter, it gets people's attention, even our elected officials. And so therefore, when we, the people, are awakened to something, we do actually have some power in getting their attention. I wonder if you guys agree.
I mean, I think there's a growing understanding of what we are actually doing when we're on the internet, like that we're not just a consumer, we're also the product. And there's almost a sense where I think like the naivete of Congress or certain users can be instructive. So when we're asking like, why isn't going on Facebook like buying a car? Why can't I buy a different brand of car? I don't remember which, who brought that up. And similarly, like if I buy a pair of shoes and I don't like them, I can return them, but like I can't get my data back. Or even if, or even if you say that you've deleted my data, it's that actually doesn't make sense because you could have already analyzed it and extracted its value. I do think that is changing a little bit. How quickly it's changing, I don't really
And we need to elect people who understand how things work. And also, additionally, I mean, we used to have an Office of Technological Assessment, if you guys recall, and this was an advisory body that worked to advise Congress on scientific and technologically complex matters. And that would be profoundly helpful at a moment like this to have experts these people could call and say, what should I ask Zuckerberg? How does this work? But the Congress voted to get rid of that office like 10 years ago. Or 5 years ago?
No, it was Newt Gingrich period.
Oh, okay, so it was Newt. He just said it was, not necessary, redundant, didn't want to pay for it, and therefore now there isn't an organized body to help our elected officials understand what is highly complex. They can't really be expected to totally understand it.
But I mean, let me put two kind of positive. It was a really depressing talk. Yeah. So let me do two. I mean, the first is there may be alternatives. So one program that the organization I work with is created a Tech Fellows program that actually takes technologists and plugs them into congressional staffs. And what's been fascinating is just the massive demand from congressional members to have these technologists on their staff. And the idea is that they can serve as that exchange. And they've helped write some of the good legislation that's come out. And again, both Republicans and Democrat members have said, I would like a technologist like this one. So that demand signal is there. And then the other demand signal is from us. So I don't know what their positions will be, but I can pretty much guarantee everyone running in 2020 will have to have some kind of position on regulation of social media companies. Now, it might be a really thin position. They might not well support it, but the demand signal from us is you better have a position.
Great.
So we have power.
Oh, sorry. We're going to have our final question here in the front.
Okay.
Hello. I'm a software test engineer by day and a travel blogger by night. And twice last year, my travel blog was hacked. And when I looked at Google Analytics, when my site was brought back up by the company that did it for me, it was a Russian area country that hacked it twice. I don't know how to pronounce it. One of those countries that ends with a stan.
There are many of those.
Uzbekistan or Uzbekistan, one of those. So my question is, this evening we've been mostly talking about one platform being hacked, such as Facebook needing to take more responsibility, or national electric grids being hacked. But when it comes to something like blogging, you have two entities involved. You have a hosting company such as GoDaddy or Bluehost, and then you have the blogging site such as WordPress and my site. How do you see multiple entity situations interacting in the future? Do you see hosting companies and blogging companies working together to look into how to prevent hacking and attacks, or do you see like one taking more responsibility, or how do you see that playing out in the future?
I see it playing out badly. You think about how much you pay a year for your platform, right? And that's the kind of value you're getting. And it's you pay $10, $20. It's going to be something really small. There's not a whole lot of tech engineering that $20 a year is going to purchase. And as we get to these devices becoming cheaper, you're going to see more of those interactions and less responsibility taken. Right? When your internet-connected toothbrush hacks your refrigerator, to your car, everyone's going to blame somebody else, and no one's going to do anything. And I think this is actually, it's a joke, but it's actually a real problem. That things happen, and because our services are free or cheap, there isn't anybody to call. You can't call GoDaddy and get real tech support because we don't want to pay for it. And that's going to be an increased problem. I mean, as you get higher in the stack, there'll be someone at the automobile manufacturers who will do things, but it'll be less. It won't be as good as what Apple has. And there's an enormous team behind this, and they're doing a really good job, and they screw up pretty regularly. And as you get sort of cheaper, it gets much, much worse, much faster.
I don't know if anyone here has tried to use the customer service of a free product. So I did this when I had my Amanda Hesser problem. I went to there are these Google forums where people will try to troubleshoot your question for virtual tokens. What they use them for, I'm not sure. So I asked, I had this question that was, when you put my name into Google, it pipes out this, completely different person who doesn't have the same name as me. Is there anything I can do about it? And they were basically like, yes, add more information to the internet about yourself. Get somebody to write a Wikipedia page for you. Become more famous.
Change your
Be
name.
better at your job. Instead of somebody, who could actually go in and like
tweak
shut
it.
off whatever thing was putting it to that. So.
Okay, well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. We could have kept talking for 2 hours. We never got to the smart bombs and satellites, but that'll be next time.
Maybe that's best.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe that would be too scary.
Thank you. What a long and winding road.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. It was really fascinating, troubling, confusing, but really important. And we invite all of you down one floor to a reception. Bruce and Peter's books will be available for purchase, and they'll be signing, and there will be things to eat and drink. So we hope you'll join us and continue the evening.